Hey guys, welcome back to Robco TV. I'm Ashley. This is Jake, my dad Darren. From our experience with buying property that wasn't for sale to tips on purchasing a first investment home, we're going to talk about what you need to know to get started in the world of real estate. So Darren, you've had some experience with investing in real estate, like commercial real estate, right?
Yeah.
So
Well,
tell us
I've
a
owned a
little,
number of homes too, but so I've had personal and commercial real estate.
so tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, the first commercial real estate that I purchased, we were looking to build a storage unit facility, but we got such a good deal on the property, we honestly could have just turned around and sold it and made a couple $100,000 on it. And the way that we did it is we drove around and looked at different properties that we were interested in. And then we went down to the county courthouse. Every property has an address that the county can send a property tax bill to. And so you can go to the county courthouse and you can get those addresses and then use that address to look up the owner of the property, or you can just send a mailer to that address, however you want to do it. Now there's a program called OnX, just ONX. It's an app for hunters or hikers to know whose property they're actually going on, so you can get permission to go on property. So it has the same information as the county courthouse on each property. So that makes it a little bit easier because you can drive around and look it up as you're driving around. So we went and looked up a bunch of properties, and then my business partner, I can't take credit for how we actually acquired it because he took those addresses, looked up the people, got their information, started making calls. Didn't have any success at first. We finally he finally talked to somebody who directed to another person. Long story short, the property wasn't for sale, but my partner said, "Hey, these people have this property. I think they would sell it to us. I'm going to make an offer. What should I offer?" And I told so it was 11 acres. I told him offer 100,000. He offered them 50,000 and they took it. And at first they said, "No, we're not interested." And he said, "Well, we could give you $50,000 for it. We could pay all of the fees for title and everything." And so there was a lady, she said, "Yeah, we actually would be interested in that." So we bought 11 acres for $50,000 right on a frontage road, good traffic road. And we could have just turned around and sold it for 250 to 300 if we wanted to. Well, we were looking to do a storage facility, so right out of the chute, we were saving a ton of money just buying the property. But that's how we did it. That's how you buy property that's not for sale. Use Onyx or go to the county courthouse, find out who owns the property. You can do a search online to find the actual owner and sometimes find their phone number. But then you reach out to them and you make them an offer, and that's how we did it.
Yeah, and so there were a few hiccups that you had on the process. Would there be any advice that you'd give to people doing this just to make sure they don't get
Yes.
caught up?
First of all, use a title company. If you're doing this on your own, you're trying to save money, it's still very valuable to use a title company because what we found, and my partner and I had talked about this, and at first we decided we weren't going to use a title company because of the extra money that it would cost, which it's not a lot. It was like $250. We used a title company. They did a title search and ended up finding that the property was recorded wrong. So if we would have just gone over and had it deeded to us, the way that the measurements for the property was worded, we wouldn't have actually owned the property. And so we would have built our whole business on that. And then somebody could have come along and discovered that the property that we own actually doesn't exist because the way the description is incorrect.
You coulda gotten in trouble for that.
Well, who knows what could have happened, but they could have potentially taken the property from us because it didn't exist. The way that it was worded, it didn't actually exist.
Was there anything else that ended up happening that you were able to figure out?
Well, so the owners were feuding, and we started out with one title company, and we ended up using the title company that was local to them because the lady knew the family personally, and she was able to get them all to re-sign the correct documents, where they would have never done it with the other title company. So using a local title company could sometimes help if it's a small town,
Okay.
and that title company knows their local residents.
Yeah. So it's good to just make sure you're checking all the right boxes so that you don't get caught in anything that you
Yeah,
don't want to be in.
right. We would have just spent 50,000 on nothing
Yeah.
potentially. Okay, so another way that you would use this, and it would be specifically for a real estate agent because you kind of have to have access to the MLS to look at properties that have already sold. There may be other ways to do it, but the easiest way is just to get on the MLS because the MLS shows you the history of sold homes and what they sold for. So the strategy would be you look in rural areas, outlying areas, and you watch for properties that sell. Once a property kind of sells that's kind of out on its own island, nothing else is selling around it, there's probably a reason that property sold. And so what you can do is you can then so you're watching it on the MLS, or you look at the history of the MLS of property that have sold in these rural areas, and then you go and contact the property owners, doing what I just explained. Contact the property owners that are around that, make them much lower offers than what the property that sold went for, and then if you acquire it for a low price, you can either list it because this person bought that property. There's a potential other person that would be interested, or you could actually contact the person that purchased that property and say, "Hey, I've got another piece of land. Would you be interested in it?" And you could sell that to them as well. So that's a way to, and I have a friend that taught me this because he actually does that. He's constantly watching property in outlying areas, and then once one sells, he's had a really good track record of purchasing land, making low offers, purchasing land around it, then either selling it to that uh, the person that purchased that property or somebody else. He just relists it and sells it for more.
As a big hole, we call
Right,
them.
right. So you find that somebody bought 10 acres for 50, $60,000. You make an offer for 10 or 20,000 on property around it, acquire one of those, go back to that owner. Obviously it's nearby. Go back to that owner and say, "Hey, I have this property for sale for, you know, whatever your markup is." And a lot of times they would be interested because there was a reason they bought that acreage in the first place, and they would likely want more, especially if it was a reasonable price. So that's one way that you can buy property and turn around and flip it. Just just property without a home on it.
Yeah.
Right. And so Ashley and I, we've been married for about almost a year next month. And we've always had the goal that we wanted to buy our own house. And so right now we're renting. We don't love it. Like we're looking for a way to get out. But we always thought it would be like a couple years, like till we'd be able to get out of renting where we're at right now. Until both of us are college students and Ashley just happened to see like a pamphlet on an elevator for this first time homebuyers class. And so we went to it and we ended up learning a lot. And one of the biggest things that we realized is that it's actually a lot more possible to buy a home in today's world as a young married couple than we originally thought. And so when we showed up to this class, there's this guy, his name's Josh. He's this loan officer that was teaching all these like young couples that were there. Um, and we had like no clue going into it. Like everyone always complains like how awful the housing market is and how like hard it is to get anything nowadays, which is true, but like it is possible that we learned from this class.
Yeah, so we thought we weren't going to be able to purchase a house for years. We thought we'd be renting for a while. So this definitely did help. So we wanted to share some of the things that we learned. All right, Jake. So tell us some of like the checkpoints that our friend Josh told us about.
Yeah, so it was actually pretty simple the way that he broke it down. Probably the biggest thing that you're going to be able to need is, well, a lot of them are pretty big. But the first thing is be able to have at least 2 years of work history, which hopefully most people will have that if they're looking at buying a house. Um, and then the other thing is having a credit score over 680. And do you want to tell us about the hack a little bit you can do if
Yeah.
you might not have a super strong credit score?
Yeah, so this is what the loan officer shared with you guys, but we had actually already done it with our kids.
Yeah, I was like, check on that.
Yeah. So, my brother's in the mortgage industry. He taught me this, but you basically just add your kids to your credit card as an authorized user. You don't have to give them the credit card. All you do is add them as an authorized user. As soon as you do that, they immediately have a similar credit score as you do. And so you don't have to build credit or anything. You just add your kids. As a parent, you add your kids, and then immediately they have a similar credit score to you.
Yeah.
Which the parents better have a good credit score, right? Or
Yeah, assuming
or it doesn't help.
score.
It doesn't help, but that way you immediately have a credit score that you can then use to put towards use it to buy a house.
Yeah. So did your parents do that with you, Jake?
Yeah, my parents didn't do that specifically with me. What they did is when I was like in high school, they got me a credit card.
Okay.
And so like they showed me how to use it. And then I went on a 2-year mission for the church. And like while I was gone, they'd still use the credit card like every now and then.
So they were using your
They were
credit card
still,
there.
yeah, so it was still like, it's kind of like the other way of doing that. They still just had my credit card building up on its own.
Yeah. And so when I graduated high school and was ready to start being an adult, then they added me to their credit score. And immediately me and Jake were both able to have good credit scores. So now that we're looking to buy a house,
It's real good and handy.
yeah, we can already take that box off.
A strategy you can do too that I know my dad's told me about is that they live on a farm up in Oregon, and he recently bought a 4-wheeler, and he was telling me about this 4-wheeler that he got, and he said he went to the dealership and got it, and he's like making payments on it, and I was like, well, why are you making payments on the 4-wheeler? You could just pay it all in cash. He's like, I could, but like I can just make payments on it and build up my credit score like even more on top of everything else that he had.
So they're just little small payments.
And so yeah, little small payments, but having that consistency over time is going to help you a lot.
It's really smart. Yeah.
And the other thing that he talked about for getting this house, he wanted to have around a 3.5% down payment. And so right now where we're looking at some houses that are kind of around the 500,000 range. And so 3.5 of that is going to be around like 18,000. Don't check the math on that. But kind of like around 18,000 range. And so for us, we're kind of in a lucky spot because we're young college students. We just don't have 18,000 in cash laying around. But we do have some assets that we are so blessed to have, and it would be possible for us to turn that asset into cash that we could use towards that down payment.
Yeah. And in previous episodes, we have talked about how you can flip things on KSL for some extra cash. And so even if you maybe don't have an asset right now, you can work your way up to be able to do that. So you can check out our past episodes if you want to learn how to make some quick cash for something to put towards like a down payment. Another thing we learned that maybe you don't know, maybe you already know, but in rural, I can't say this word. I was practicing before this episode and I still can't say rural areas.
Rural.
Rural. In rural area. Anyways, places that are not the city, you can get a USDA loan for 0% down, right?
Yep.
Okay. Also,
Darren's our real estate agent, so he's back checking us on all this.
yeah. So that's another thing to think about. If you don't want to save up for that down payment, maybe, and your options are a little bit more flexible as far as where you're living, maybe a rural area is for you.
And if you don't live in a rural area, something I feel like it's super popular in the state of Utah and the cities is to have like some sort of basement apartment that you rent out. Because for some reason, all the houses in Utah, like in Utah County, have like all these basement apartments with private entrances. Because there's so many like colleges everywhere, all these people just rent out their basement apartments as an ADU is what it's called. So when you have this little apartment rented out, first off, it's going to help you with your mortgage payments.
Yeah, it'll offset that so that you are able to get the loan. First of all, if you have someone come in and sign that they are going to be renting out your half of your house, then you're able to qualify for a higher mortgage payment. Sorry, a higher loan.
So you have to show that they have a contract on
Yes.
or a lease
Yeah.
agreement, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which sounds hard initially, but there's a very high demand for housing.
So one of the specific houses that we're looking at, it's around like the 500,000 range. And what's going to help us get a foot in the door for it is if we have this other little basement section of it that's rented out. And so we talked to the tenant. Yeah. We talked to the tenant. He said that he was paying around 1,100 for this. And so if we were to get like approved for this house, our mortgage payments would probably be around like 2,500. And so if we have a tenant paying 1,100 of that, then we're going to have a pretty manageable like mortgage payment. It's only going to be a little bit more than the rent we're already paying for our little basement apartment.
If you can find someone who's willing to rent out the other part of your house, and it sounds crazy to get someone to agree to rent out a house that you haven't even bought, but it actually happens more times than you think. So
And so if you're in the middle of this process, go in, and if you haven't heard of that before, go in, just like ask your loan officer, real estate agent, and they'll should know exactly what you're talking about, and they'll be able to help you out.
Well, the rental market is huge right now. There's a lot of people looking to rent, and so it's actually pretty easy to find somebody. You just want to be careful with who you rent it to. Make sure you verify, get references and verify those references. But there are a lot of people looking to rent, and so it actually is pretty easy to find renters.
I would say one thing too, make sure you check like the city and make sure that it is a legal ADU, because if you end up renting out part of your house that's not allowed to have renters there, then you could get flagged for that or penalized.
This
So
could come after you.
yeah, and then you're having to pay a high mortgage payment that you can't afford if that person moves out. So just be aware of that. And then as far as purchasing a house, the best time to invest in a house is today, right? And so I mean, the thing with the housing market is that rates are going up and down, and you're not able to tell when they're going to go up or when they're going to drop. And so if you're looking at rates right now and they're kind of scaring you, just know that it is a long-term game, and historically prices have always gone up. And so just have that in the back of your mind that it probably will keep going up. And so the best time to get a loan for a house is right now. And then if it does happen to go down later, they have this saying called date the rate, marry the house. So that just means that you can refinance and get a lower mortgage payment if it's worth it. And so if you do choose to date the rate and you end up refinancing and getting a lower rate, Darren, would you as a real estate agent, would you have any like things to watch out for refinancing?
Well, I would say that a majority of Americans, they refinance and refinance and refinance. They're always trying to get a better rate, right? But they're in their 70s and 80s and they still have a house payment. The advice that I would give is, if you are going to refinance, continue to make that same payment so that you pay off your house faster. Because realistically, if you pay off your house in 30 years, you're paying double the price of your home. And so the advice that I was given, my wife's uncle is great at investing. And he told us, hey, the most important thing you could do is pay off your house as soon as you can. And so we dumped everything we could into it, paid our house off in 7 years. That saved so much interest that we would have been paying over that 30 years. And instead, we were able to reinvest that money that would have just gone to interest into other things. And so now we're completely debt free, and we are able to actually invest in things and earn interest instead of paying it. And so that's the only caveat to getting to refinancing is, as you refinance and lower your monthly payment, continue to make the same payment so that you're paying your house off faster. That would be my advice.
Yeah. So something else that we learned in this class, that Josh said, is says you're not gonna, or like first home's not gonna be your dream house. Unless it might be. That's great.
It's something that I'm trying to get over believing.
And so if you look at your first home as just being like an investment opportunity, like someplace you're going to be able to like live in for a bit. I believe it's a year that you have to live in there as a primary resident. and then you can move out and you can have other people come in and rent that space that you were just in. And so being able to kind of like leapfrog a little bit, if you have one house, say Ashley and I were to buy this house and we're to live there for a year, and like a year later we're going to move to like another house, the same process all over again. But once we leave, we put tenants into that house, and so they're paying enough that's going to be paying for the mortgage, and so that house is pretty much going to run itself, and like the mortgage is just going to pay for itself until however long down the road, like years from now, like the house will be totally owned by us. We won't have to be making any payments on it.
Do you have anything else to add, Jake?
Yeah, I would add just kind of like the bottom line is it can be like a big scary like thing talking about real estate, and like you might feel like you're way underqualified, you don't know anything, and like there's just all these big fancy people up there that like deal in real estate, but it's really not like that. Like it's really something that can be simplified if you understand it and take the time. Like go to a class, go read a book, like figure out what you can about real estate. It's really, really manageable. And like I'm a complete beginner. Like I don't speak real estate when I first, like before I went to this class. And after class, we started telling like all of our friends about it. And like I'm sure we probably sounded super smart, like using all these real estate terms. But just remember, like keep it simple and just take it one step at a time, and pretty soon you'll be on your way to own your first home.
Yeah. So, Darren, you were a first home buyer however many years ago, right?
25 years ago.
25 years ago. And so I'm sure there are some things that you wish you would have done or some things you did do that you were glad you did. Would you like to share those with us?
Yeah. So first of all, I would point out that the majority of Americans' wealth is in a home. By far, the majority of the wealth that is accrued in the United States is in home ownership. And so it's always a good investment as long as you're going to be in it, at least, I would say, as long as you're going to be in the home 3 or 4 years plus. If you're going to be in it shorter than that, you kind of have to weigh your options. It might not be the best investment, but for the most part, it is. 25 years ago, I was in the same situation as these two. My wife and I were newlyweds. I didn't think we could afford a house at all. And my wife went off and talked to a loan officer, went and looked at some homes and came back and said, "Hey, they said we could afford one of these." And I was like, "Really?" So yeah, we applied, we bought the home. And back then, it was 127,000 for the home that we bought. Well, typically, especially for newlyweds, you only stay in a place maybe 2 to 5 years. And this is where the advice that I would give comes in, because we made the wrong decisions here. We ended up moving to another state, and instead of keeping that home that we had had for about 3 or 4 years, instead of keeping that home and just renting it out, we sold it. We made a little bit of money on it, basically cashed out our equity, moved to another state, and then 2 years later, we moved back. Well, this was in 2007, 2008. When we moved back, that same house was worth 200,000 more. If we had just rented it out, we would have had the rental history that we could have used that to put towards purchasing another property, and the house was worth 200,000 more. So we would have gained 200,000 in equity and had a rental history that we could have used to put towards purchasing another property. When we were going through all this, I remember when we sold that house, we had real estate agents contacting us. We listed it, just threw it in the paper, right? The paper. It's been a while ago.
Dated you.
We listed it, and immediately all these real estate agents started contacting us saying, "Hey, we can sell your house for more than you're offering it for." And we didn't understand how any of that works. So what I would recommend you do is, if you have a friend that's a real estate agent, or there's so much information available online, I would get in and learn all that you can about real estate so that you understand, you're not blindsided by anything. You really understand what you're getting yourself into. Understand, like they go through this at closing when you're buying your house. They'll tell you this is what you're going to pay over 30 years at this mortgage rate. And so sometimes they're sticker shocked that, wow, we're paying this much, but in 30 years, we'll have paid this much. But that really should just motivate you to pay it off faster, which I already mentioned is really the best advice. Just pay it off as fast as you can. I've had people tell me, hey, don't pay off your house because it is a write-off and you can use that money to invest in something else. My experience has been it was the best decision we ever made to pay it off as fast as we can. Not having that mortgage payment and the interest that we are paying has allowed us to do so much more because we've had freedom from debt.
And if you have questions for us too specifically, go and reach out. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. Shoot us a text. We're more than happy to give you a brief rundown of what exactly we're talking about.
Yeah, drop your questions and comments in the comments below, and we'll see you next time.